I would say everybody in the company knows exactly where we are against plan, and they know hopefully what their objectives are to support the achievement of that plan. And because in a work environment that's all remote, you really can't manage any inputs. The whole idea is to just manage the output, basically the outcome. And so by having clear communication each week about how we're pacing and what people need to do to hit those outcomes, I find that at least we're able to kind of provide more context for the average employee to make their own decisions about how they spend their time.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow? Thanks for tuning in here to Grow Think Tank. Really excited about sharing this with you. And before you run, I have done so many interviews over the last few weeks. I have such an exciting time to share with you that those interviews have been organized into the 12 core principles of fast growth companies. So all you have to do to get that is go to genehammett.com/worksheet. So you can get the 12 principles, and I've been able to go in there and find which episodes will align to each individual episode. When you subscribe to Grow Think Tank, you will find exactly what you need so that you can move forward. And many of them haven't been published yet, depending on when you're hearing this, but you can tune in to the date that means the most to you. A lot of companies are facing the need for hiring people, but they don't actually have them in their local area. They may have offices in separate area, but they really are looking to hire the best people. So when you want to hire the best people, you might have to think differently about how you run and operate the business. Well, one of the things that you have to look at differently is the need for remote employees. If you want to hire the best engineers, they might not be right at your doorstep. If you want to hire the best marketers, maybe you have someone that's completely in another time zone or country than you're in right now. Now, you've probably faced this, as this is a natural way for us to develop our workforces and develop our companies right now, is hiring these remote workers. Now, there's some pros and cons to this that we're going to go through in today's interview, but one of them is about, how do you communicate and how do you develop culture when people are remote? And a lot of people put up objections right away. Our guest today is Jeff Kupietzky. Jeff is the CEO of PowerInbox, and PowerInbox is a really innovative marketing company. They're growing really fast, amazing growth. They're number 30 on the Inc. list. I had to look at my notes here. With 45 employees, they knew that they had to have a different structure than what other companies had. They have them all over the world. And we talk about the cadence of meetings and some of the things that they do differently than others. One of the things I love the most is really the discussion of, and instead of delegating an actual kind of project, they delegate the outcome. And really, they have scorecards toward the outcome. And it really is a way for people to take more ownership of the work. I love what they're doing, and we're going to share some of those insights with you. So this is Jeff, the CEO of PowerInbox. Hi, Jeff. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Gene?
I'm fantastic. I'm really excited about having you on the Global Think Tank podcast. I would love for our audience to understand about your company, PowerInbox, and about you personally as a leader. So tell us about the company and about you.
No, I appreciate that. So I'll start with the company. We provide a service to digital publishers to help them monetize their messaging channels, primarily email, but also push notifications and others, and really help them better engage their audiences with what we think is much more relevant and dynamic content. Company's been around for a couple of years. We've been fortunate to hit the Inc. list in the last couple of years, so it's growing very quickly. My own background, I've worked in mostly digital media and SaaS companies ever since I left business school. I've done work on the East Coast, the West Coast, and now a much further coast, and then I'm based out of Tel Aviv, Israel.
Well, when you think about the leadership that makes a company grow fast, what are the core principles that you believe that has made you guys grow so fast?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, number one, you got to pick good people. And we were fortunate to kind of create the nucleus of our team through a private company merger. So we were a small company. We found another small company, kind of saw eye to eye, and we put them together. And that was kind of the nucleus of a great founding team. And I'm pleased to say all of those founding members, it's now going on almost 8 years, they're all together still, even though our business models have changed a bit. The target space has changed. What hasn't changed is our kind of desire to work together. So that's been very, very fortunate for us. Great recipe. On top of that, I think we had very clear objectives. So the initial kind of products we were trying to build, while they didn't work out as well, when we finally hit on the one that did work well, we were very focused on what we were trying to solve. And that made it easy to stay focused. It made it easy for us to see the traction. And then, frankly, the last one was we didn't overspend. So we made sure to kind of stay within our means. And so as we grew, we were able to kind of fund that growth and not always have to be looking outside for capital.
That's rare these days, because a lot of people think, oh, I just need capital to grow. But you took a different approach with that. When you think about, going back and redoing it again, would you have done anything differently?
Oh, it would have been great to find the winner earlier in the process than it took us as long as it did. And in full disclosure, we did raise money, but obviously, had we had that money earlier in the process, or maybe kind of again, once we had the idea, we might not have had to take as much dilution when we did do that raise. But all in all, we're very pleased. We know there are many different outcomes for a firm, and the fact that we're now able to say we have a high growth and profitable business is kind of a unique achievement, and we're just thrilled to kind of be a part of it.
Well, a lot of your team is remote based. So you have about 45 employees, I have that right?
We do. And they're across many different geographies and time zones. I always say I'm not sure that we started the business with that as an objective, kind of evolved to that. As I mentioned, the company was started by a merger of two private companies, and one was based at the time in Tel Aviv and one was based in Boston. And then through a whole bunch of reasons, we wanted to provide flexibility to the founding members to live where they felt more comfortable. And that actually became for us a bit of a mantra, that we noticed there was a way to recruit and attract talent that wasn't in the traditional either Silicon Alley in New York or Silicon Valley in the West Coast. And that became something that helped differentiate us early on, in that we attracted great technical talent no matter where the individual lived. We obviously have to learn a bit about how best to take advantage and build a communication structure around those folks. But that kind of core insight of let's find great people no matter where they are, turned out to be, again, another good decision we made early on.
Well, there is a big war for talent. I think a lot of companies are filling it if they're looking for new people. And you have, kind of removed some of the barriers of geography. When you think about that as a strategy, that's got to have helped you guys with that talent coming on board.
It did, but we've also learned the hard way all the things that you have to avoid as well. So I'll kind of just share some of those items, because I think it becomes logical after the fact, but you don't really know it going in. So the first is, for example, we don't hire anybody that doesn't have at least several years experience. So we're not a great firm when it comes to somebody that's just kind of starting their career, nor have we seen success with someone who hasn't already significantly worked outside of an office. So we find you can't really train this. You can't really expose somebody for the first time. They have to have already, if you will, almost self-selected for this kind of work environment. It requires an individual that is extraordinarily self-disciplined, that can kind of follow objectives and doesn't need a lot of, frankly, either interaction or management attention. So we're probably familiar with people that do really well in that environment, but you can probably just as much relate to people that weren't as successful, because this environment isn't for everybody.
Well, I love the fact that you have that dialed in. Did you figure out that hiring people who have never worked outside the office just wasn't going to work because you hired?
Yeah, we found out by hiring them, and then they didn't work. So they're not with us anymore. And to be honest, some of that was just, voluntary attrition, meaning that they just didn't see it as a fit either. And I had a crazy story where we were having a salesperson, a remote role, and without him kind of letting us know, he started moonlighting for another company, maybe thinking that because he was remote, we wouldn't figure it out. Well, obviously we quickly figured it out, but kind of it underscored for us that all we could screen for is integrity and good people, because you can't really keep your eye on them. So I think that's helped us also realize from the mistakes we have made, what to kind of avoid in the future.
Jeff talked about self-directed employees. And let me just chime in here for a second. When you hire someone, your intention is never to hire someone that needs to be micromanaged and needs to be told what to do day in and day out. You never wanted to hire someone where you thought that you would just tell them and they were kind of a monkey that just would pedal faster when you told them to. You want them to actually think for themselves. So Jeff talked about the power of hiring these self-directed people, and really a value that they have in the company is that you think for yourself, you take ownership of the work, and that is what allows them to have the efficiency that they have as a fast-growing company, but with employees all over the country. So I share this with you because I want you to think about your ability to have people that are self-directed. A lot of the work I do is helping companies create more ownership, that help them go beyond responsibility. So if there's anything I do that could help you with that, let's set up a call. Now back to there. Now, a lot of people have resisted the remote teams because of the lack of team that comes when you're in different places. How have you guys overcome that objection?
Yeah, I mentioned before we went on air that this is still a work in progress. So, when we were 20, 30 people, it was pretty easy because communication is really simple. There's a single individual typically with a single set of responsibilities, and the most they have to interact with is maybe 2 or 3 others. So the single engineer talks to the single product manager, and then maybe has to bring in the single point of contact from the sales team. Now we're a bit bigger. It's a bit more complex, the products. They require 6 to 8 people maybe involved in something. So communication really is a premium. We try and kind of address that in a couple of ways. One is that we do believe in bringing people together. So even though we have a remote working environment, we try and insist on at least 3 times a year. We have what I call on-sites. It's the same thing as an off-site, but because everyone works remotely, it's really the only time they're all together. So we try and celebrate kind of coming together. We make it both fun and a work week. But those relationships where people can kind of bond together in person are extremely important to then foster the communication when they go back to their home offices and start working remote again. We're obviously big believers in Zoom and Skype and Slack and any mechanism, even the plain old telephone. We encourage that as well, just to make sure that it's not purely a messaging-based environment, but there's face-to-face interaction. We do encourage video wherever you can. And there's still issues, and you obviously have to recognize that you have to work harder to communicate. It doesn't come naturally. There's not the kind of easy conversations that just happen because you're both sitting over a water cooler. Here you have to actually reach out to people to kind of make that happen.
Now, a lot of millennials really value the flexibility of a workforce. I would imagine many of your employees are millennials. And has that been an attractive kind of benefit to the millennial talent that wants to work for you?
Yeah, I'd say we're mixed on that. Again, some of the millennials who had not had prior remote experience didn't work out as well because they need that mentorship. They need to see people every day. I think we're finding, again, that we skew towards probably a bit more mature. I once got quoted in an article where I said mature, and everyone said, "Why are you calling us all old?" I said, "Just have significant work experience." I'd say the average of our 45 people is at least 10 years. And so that's pretty unique in a fast growth ad tech, high tech kind of business. But that said, I think our millennials we have in the company, and they are extraordinarily self-directed. They're folks that know how to balance their personal and professional lives, and that makes it work too. I'll share a quick story. This is always one I like. We had a young employee that was just starting out in kind of his married life, and they had a kid, and we saw his productivity just completely fall off. And what we finally realized once we started talking to him about performance and everything was that he just needed to close his door when he was working and then open it when he was done. But the fact that kind of they had a new family, it was hard for him to kind of make that separation. So you still want to create a bit formality in your home office, but the whole idea is to provide that flexibility. So you can still put in what we think is a legitimate set of hours a day. Those, though, are at your choice. They can be at any point during the week. We wouldn't know if you do it on the weekend or not, or even where you're doing those hours. So it's really kind of filtering for that personality that is good at making those divisions of time, who can be, self-directed.
Now, from a leadership standpoint, how do you handle one-on-one meetings and things like that really engage and kind of develop that employee to the next level?
So I probably am on a plane a bit more than the average person, and I do believe in the face-to-face. So while our team will get together 3 times, I'll try and reach out to different folks through my travels. At least once a month, I'll meet and kind of do team dinners, depending what city I'm in. And then obviously I have a regular set of weekly one-on-ones for my direct reports. and every 2 or 3 weeks with kind of skip directs. It's an effort. You have to go and kind of make sure you schedule that time and you made it a priority. I think without that, it doesn't work as well.
Now, what about week-to-week meetings or any kind of regular cadence of meetings? Do you do a daily stand-up or anything like that within teams or the whole company?
Yeah, so I've gotten also some experimentation. We've tried different things. We now have hit upon what I think is a good balance. We do one all-company meeting every Monday morning. We set it for 9 a.m. Eastern, no matter what time zone you're in. For some folks, that's early. Some folks, it's very late. But the idea is let's get everybody together beginning of the week and kick off what's going on. And the other thing I try and do is we're very transparent about the business pacing. How are we doing today, yesterday, this week, this month? I would say everybody in the company knows exactly where we are against plan, and they know hopefully what their objectives are to support the achievement of that plan. And because in a work environment that's all remote, you really can't manage any inputs. The whole idea is to just manage the output, basically the outcome. And so by having clear communication each week about how we're pacing and what people need to do to hit those outcomes, I find that at least we're able to kind of provide more context for the average employee to make their own decisions about how they spend their time. Ultimately, each team then comes up with their own cadence. Some meet then with their own stand-ups every other day or every day. Some it's once a week. But we try and minimize the formal meetings, if you will. I do another kind of full company all hands once a month, but not more often than that. And then there's not maybe one other two other kind of standing meetings, and everything else is kind of set by the team level.
When you think about some of the challenges you've overcome in having a remote workforce, what comes to mind as something that you had to work through and figure out?
So when you're dealing just with founders, we found it to be a pretty easy thing, right? We all know each other. We work together. Now we're kind of in a different time zone, so we'll just kind of pick up that relationship. What we found was that new people need to be really thought through their onboarding because it's a different way to work. They don't have the context. They don't have the relationships. They don't have that base of kind of familiarity. And again, this is a work in progress, but we found that it's real important that early in someone's onboarding that you get that face-to-face time. If it's a new engineer, we fly them to a location where they're with another engineer. If it's a new person in the sales organization, we make sure they're traveling with another salesperson or they're in the same location for a period of time. We try and schedule people starting around do one of these on-sites. So there's kind of interaction with others. And then we try and track their progress 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. So we really try and have a high level of your onboarding is important to us. We want to know how you're doing so that they can kind of get, if you will, I think part of that culture of now we're going to let you figure it out on your own, but at least we've given you some of the tools to start with. I've seen people, adjust faster than others. So like I said, it's still a work in progress, but that turns out to be a pretty important thing that new employees have to be managed through the onboarding rather than just being thrown to the deep end.
I think a lot of companies could learn from that onboarding process because it's one of the critical components of, once you find a great person is really getting them connected and getting them in the culture and becoming a part of the team as opposed to, just get this work done.
That's right. I always find, I think it's setting the context and then creating the relationships to improve the communication. And we continue to be surprised sometimes about just forcing people into these kind of interactions, whether that's in person or just over the phone or kind of other ways that they talk to each other that really foster a better working relationship.
Now, you may have already answered this, but I guess I am, kind of curious around the uncommon approaches that you've taken to create a culture with remote workers.
So like I said, we really kind of focus on outcomes. So everybody has a scorecard that says, this is my job. This is what I have to accomplish. Those are public and visible to everybody in the company. We then make every company goal, department goal visible as well. And the whole idea here is that we kind of remove what normally might happen in a kind of single workplace, which is people close doors. They work kind of, with the blinds down. Well, this is finance. I'm not going to share that with you. We have that luxury, if you will, of hiding the data. So in some ways, we put it all out there. And what we find, again, is people just want to have the context, right? Even if it's not their job necessarily to worry about cash or those things, if we give people the comfort of knowing that this is available to them, it removes some of the concerns and the fear. And then I think, again, focusing on what we have to get done together, we think helps define for them, okay, now let me define what I'm going to do in the context of this broader company goal. And we find over and over again, if we can kind of give people the context, give them the overall goal, they're typically smart enough to figure out what they need to do to kind of get their piece along that entire system.
I want to pause right here because Jeff talked about this scorecard where really they're tracking outcomes, that they didn't have enough of a communication and they're not meeting on a frequency to really talk about the inputs to work, that really they just talked about the outcomes. Really is a great way to increase the level of ownership with people because there's really nowhere to hide, because you need them to understand the results that they're going to get from the work that they're doing, and they're really working to find a way to get there. It doesn't matter how they get there, as far as I'm not saying that they need to be out of integrity, but what I am saying is it doesn't matter specifically how they do it. You just want to make sure that they're getting the job done and hopefully innovating along the journey, because that's what keeps a company growing and keeps it from getting stale. Employees appreciate this trust to give them the outcome, because they can take ownership of how they get there, and they can take ownership of the goal because they know that's objective that they need to meet to move up in the ranks and to create more value for the company, and they really appreciate that. I've seen organizations that have increased that sense of ownership just by this one factor, is by stop doing it the old way, but to really just talk about the outcomes that they're driving to, and that's what they really focused on. So back to the interview with Jeff. Jeff, there's two pieces in there that really align well with my research on fast growth companies and leadership. One of them is to, a lot of people want to delegate the task of a process or something like that because it's been proven, and maybe it's just something that we need to follow step by step. But I have always said, I understand that, but why not just give them the outcome and let them figure it out for themselves, and maybe even say this might help you, but make it your own, because that outcome place is really huge. And the second piece behind this is just a sense of transparency that you have with these scorecards. Did you learn that somewhere through your travels or through your work?
Definitely, I would say that just given the number of companies I've worked at, the more you share, the better you do. Especially when times aren't great, you kind of build that trust. And so therefore, if you're consistent, you kind of, I think, weather through, harder periods. And we've been fortunate, the business cycle now has been pretty long. It's been positive. So this company might not have been challenged yet with some of the downturns that I've seen earlier in other companies. So it's important for me that people kind of always know where we stand, so to speak. And so far we've been fortunate to kind of have that. I'd say I've also learned I kind of don't have the patience for what might be the harder task of deciding who sees what piece of information. How do I remember that? Numbers that you show, it's much easier to say, hey, look, guys, this is what the board asked me to do. I'm going to tell you what my job is. You guys help me get it done.
I think employees really appreciate that level of trust that you have with your objectives, and giving them a chance to be a part of it, giving them a chance to take ownership of it, has probably contributed to the growth of the company, would you say? Absolutely.
Absolutely. And again, you always want to celebrate when people do come up with something that is innovative or they took ownership on something. And we really try and do that as well. It's hard for me to ever imagine that I'm an expert in all the different functions we bring together. And so all I can do is help them kind of with the context, hopefully set a little bit of the culture, and then just to make sure they have the tools that they need to kind of get their job done.
Well, I love the nature of this, and you guys have some complexities with having a remote workforce. What would you say to someone that's considering moving a little bit more remote? Because the war for talent is something that comes up in almost every one of my interviews, is finding and attracting and retaining that best place to work. But what would you say to someone else that's considering it but hasn't taken the leap?
Yeah, I don't think that there's an absolute, either you're all remote or you're all not remote. I think that there's a continuum. I would say flexibility is important. So what we're finding as an example is as we scale, it's a challenge to say we're 100% only remote. We actually find some people prefer having that kind of social interaction that allows for people to kind of work near each other. So we're kind of talking about a concept of a hub where maybe if there's enough collection of employees in an area, it makes sense to put them all into a WeWork as an option, not required, but that allows them to kind of self-manage into smaller groups that they see on a more regular basis. as companies think about that war for talent and what they need to do, I do think there are certain departments that need more of that interaction, and it's important for them to have kind of more face time. And others, it's much easier for them to work remotely. So it's that flexibility of not saying it's an absolute one or the other, but a recognition that, again, if you're doing this to empower your employee base and frankly, holding them accountable, you'll get a good outcome. If the whole idea is it's kind of we know best, corporate's going to decide, you're not really empowering your employee base. So even if you tell them they can work from home, they don't feel the same, I would say, ownership of that work process. They might resist then other things that corporate asks them to do.
Well, I appreciate you being here on the podcast and sharing your insights on this. And congratulations on your fast growth and continued growth, because I know that you're really pacing well to be on the list again this year.
I appreciate your time, and thanks so much for the opportunity.
Wow, what a fantastic interview. You know, I love the part where he's talking about the cadence of meetings that happen, because if you have a remote team, you want to make sure you get that right cadence. You can't have too many meetings where people feel micromanaged, but if you can't have too few meetings where people don't feel supported and they can't share and communicate and collaborate together. So you've got to get that balance right. And Jeff talked about some of the things that they're working through and how they figured this out. And I really love this concept. Hopefully this is helping you with some new ideas of how you can engage your remote workers and develop a team and a culture, even if they are remote, that really grows the business fast. So that's my piece today. If there's anyone that you can think of specifically that would be great to introduce them to this podcast, make sure you tell them what you like most about Growth Think Tank, because they would value your opinion about what you're getting out of it. So if there's anything I can do for you, make sure you reach out to me at gene@genehammett.com. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.